So I just want to thank you all for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maureen Folk, and I'm the Outreach and Program Coordinator here at the Chapman Museum. And tonight I'm excited to introduce you to our guest, Corlis Carroll. She was born and raised in Green Island, but has family roots here in Glens Falls. She's a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of the University at Albany. And for 25 years, she has lived and worked off of Monhegan Island in Maine. She works in private collections in the United States, Ireland, and Australia. And she is an authority on the history and materials used in painting photographs. So please join me in welcoming Corlis for her talk, The Lost Art of the Painted Photograph.
Thank you. So I kind of got the feeling that this was kind of a small room, and I want you to know that I am 4 times vaccinated. My husband Bob and I, good, thank you. We are still in the hearing aid business, and I don't go into the nursing homes, but he spends a lot of time in nursing homes. So we're ultra careful. No one comes into our office in Albany without vaccination proof, so we can't take a chance. So as soon as we could get the additional one, we got it. I want to thank you, and I want to thank the folks at Chapman. This was an amazing thing that happened. I just picked up the phone to call them because I had done years ago, I had taken this photograph when it was here, and there's one on the table. I hope we have enough to go around. I know I have a few more in the car if you need it. But I had taken this photograph, and I'm not good on the website situation. And I'm at this particular point in time deciding that I am very bad at it, and I have no desire to participate with it anymore. If you go to corliscarroll.com right now, you're going to end up at a Chinese factory that will sell you some kind of a sexually related item. I can't even look at it, to tell you the truth, but I've been hijacked. So I'm done. All right. I'm really done. But I did find out recently that somebody told me, well, that's interesting because I just did a Google search of you and that didn't come up. And I was like, hallelujah, there is a God. I'm very grateful for that. But feel free to grab one of these. So I called and talked to Maureen, and she told me that they had just recently hung this painted photograph by Juliet Chapman. And we just had a conversation about it. I'm not completely convinced. Because it looks like it's painted on board. And I'm not sure how they would have gotten the photograph on the board, but it's worth a further investigation. But it was left oil over photograph and exquisitely done, exquisitely done. So this was just by pure happenstance. I called her to tell her that I thought I had something for Chapman that might be of interest to folks like you. So I want to just first, before I begin, acknowledge my family roots here. My great-grandmother, Ella Jane Sillingham, she was born in Fort Anne, but she and her husband lived on Baldwin Avenue. It's where my mother grew up. My mother went to Glens Falls High School, graduated in class of 1931. And Nana was a published author. I just found out that the Fenimore Museum in Cooperstown, we'll talk about that a little bit, has bought a copy of her book in 1972. They bought it from a dealer in Pennsylvania. So I was happy to hear that. It's around, it's in a lot of places. She wrote it when she published it when she was finished it when she was 31 years old and published it at the age of 37. It's at the fort in Ticonderoga, and it's a novel about Fort Ticonderoga in 1777. And the book is on the table. I prefer that you not handle it, but you're welcome to, of course, look at it. It's a love story. It's a love story about a British earl who comes to his uncle's deathbed and promises to marry his adopted Albany educated daughter. And they spend their time wandering around Ticonderoga and that area while the war is raging, and ultimately they go back to England, and he He is a proponent of American freedom and makes that case in the House of Lords. That's the story. Totally based, totally fiction based. But nonetheless, he's her hero because he saved someone from drowning. And I like that. I like to think of Americans as people who are willing to save one another. So I just want to acknowledge that. This is my grandfather's Knights of Pythias, which had a chapter and maybe still does have a chapter here in Glens Falls. He died in 1918 when my mother was 5 years old. But this is just an extraordinary picture that's been in the family for a long time. And that's my dog. I have to, she's getting old. She's 14 now, but she's just a sweetheart. So I guess the beginning is the story of me. And I don't want to dwell too much on that, but when I was 31 years old, I picked up a film camera and I spent the next 9 or 10 years uninstructed, and then decided to go back to school that I really couldn't call myself a photographer. I'd never spent a second in a darkroom. So I went back to SUNY Albany, and that's where I first met the painted photograph. It was in my second class, Alternative Methods in Creating Photographs. And I loved it. And I think, I don't know this for a fact, but I think part of the reason why I loved it was because of the palette. And when we're talking about the painted photograph, everybody thinks of it as kind of this, pedestrian thing that anybody can do, and what's so special about it. And women were historically the people who did the painted photograph at their kitchen tables. I remember Rex Smith, who is the editor of the Albany Times-Union, saying to me, my mother did the painted photograph. And my first response to anybody who says that to me is, did you keep her materials? Because that's what gets lost in the process. Usually there's a picture or two, family image or something that's left over after someone passes, but the materials just go in the trash. So I'm always interested in that because the pigment that I use some of the time, not all the time, we'll talk about materials, but the pigment that I use was ground in the late 1800s. And the woman who owns that business, it was a business that was in Rochester. Makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, that's where Kodak is. And they came over from England, this family and the Nicholson family. And the business was sold to a couple in Wisconsin. And when I found them, Peerless watercolor paints, I called her, and there was a little bit of history of it on the internet. And I called her and I said, I really like these paints a lot. And I said, but I'm concerned that, you're going to run out of pigment. She said, I have enough pigment to last you 200 years. So if it doesn't take a lot of pigment to make color, right? So if anybody is interested in pursuing the lost art of the painted photograph, I highly recommend that you call Peerless Paints. Even if you're a watercolor painter, these paints are amazing. They come in two ways. They can mix them in a jar in water solvent. And the other way they come are on cards that look like bookmarks. And there are 80 different colors that they have, and they're vibrant, really vibrant. You won't find this color anyplace else. They're just amazing. So that's a little bit of the story of that. So I'm in SUNY Albany, and I meet the painted photograph. And at that point, I don't know anything about Peerless watercolor paints. The only thing I know about is Marshall oils. Everybody kind of sort of the traditional way to go about it. And back in the day when we were doing prints and I was in the dark room making prints, the Marshall oils were very nice for that because it was a smooth surface. Most of those papers were smooth surface, so that oil paint would move nicely on that. You were doing it with Q-tips and sometimes brush. So that worked. And one of the first images that I ever painted, I want to show that to you. It'll take me a second to find it. One of the first images that I ever painted I have that in this gathering. I'll find it. It'll come up at another time. I don't have to spend the time doing that. So I loved it, and I did it. And then of course you take other classes, and you take painting classes and sculpture classes and printmaking classes, and then I went to Monhegan Island, and in 1996 for 6 weeks in the fall. And everybody's painting on Monhegan. You don't see photographic activity, everybody's painting. And so I'm like, okay, I'll paint too. You know, it's landscape painting. So I began the process of painting, and I learned very early on in my painting career that I was never going to spend the rest of my life with painting, because I would stand for 6 weeks for one painting. And that means that I would starve. We're already starving as artists, right? Not really, but you know what I'm saying. So, but I continued to do it, and I worked in gouache and I worked in oils, and I did a few watercolors and da, da, da. And then one day I said to myself, I'm going to go back to the paint and photograph. And I picked up the phone and I called Neil McGreevy at McGreevy Pro Lab in Albany. Highly recommend this guy. He's amazing. Do you guys do business with McGreevy Pro Lab?
Not that I know of.
Oh, he's just amazing. And I said, Neil, send me, I don't care what the images are, send me 3 different types of paper that you would recommend for painting photographs on. Now we're a whole new world now, right? We're out of the dark room. We're digitally mastering all of our images. We're putting it on different kinds of paper. And so he sends me paper, and I pick one. And it's a German paper. I can't tell you what it is, but Neil knows what it is. And it really takes watercolor, very nice. The oil is still important, because I can take an oil pencil and go in a place where I don't want any watercolor to get in there, make a mark. Oil and water don't mix. So I'm still using the oils, but the papers today are more inclined to watercolor. The negative side of that is fragility. They have to be very well protected, and if they're in a museum someplace, they should be only minimally shown. I know if you go to the Clark, you're not going to see a lot of Winslow Homer, because watercolor, they will show them to you if you make an appointment in advance. But so they're delicate, but they're not horribly delicate, and you can do them again and again and again if you want to do that. I only try to do three of the same image, and sometimes I only do one. So now I'm living on Monhegan all summer long. And how many are familiar with Monhegan? Anybody in this room? Okay, so let's take a moment to talk about that. 10 miles off the coast of Maine is an island called Monhegan Island. It's been a home to artists since the 1860s, began with a New Hampshire luminist by the name of Aaron Draper Shattuck. And he went out there to paint, and others followed suit. And before you knew it, the whole New York City community, the Art Students League, those guys, and some women, Louise Nevelson, who was a sculptor, said that Monhegan was the inspiration for every piece of work that she ever did. That was quite high praise. We have the Museum of Monhegan has a small one of hers. But this is kind of, the island in it gives all the depths of the water and all that. But this is a half a mile wide, basically, by 1.5 miles long. And when you come into the island, make sure I got my points here. Yeah, so you come into the island at this point right here. All right. And you walk, there's a wharf, and you walk up the hill, and you're going to see some of that. And this is what you see as you're getting off the boat. And while I'm here, I'm going to tell you that this is the work of a young woman who grew up in outside of Schenectady, Carolyn Mrazek. She's, I would say, relatively new to the world of painting, but I like what she's doing. No one has ever done this. I've never seen anybody paint this perspective. This is what it looks like when the boat pulls up to the dock. This is what you see. You're looking up the hill, and right there is the Island Inn. Island Inn, I think, is like 32 rooms or something like that. They're usually booked by now. I would imagine they're booked by now for the entire season. But it's not the only place to stay on Monhegan. There are other places. So when I first went out to Monhegan, the way you get there, the way you live there, unless you're independently wealthy and you can afford to spend $1 million on a piece of property, which was not me at all, you get a job. And the first job I got was working as a hostess in a restaurant. And then I went to Ireland for 2 months the following year, and then went back to Monhegan, and I was a housekeeper worked 10 hours a week. I had my own place to stay and cook and shower, and the rest of my time was spent at the easel. And this is now the view that's about 20 steps from my back door. I don't do housekeeping anymore. A property that became available because the people who rented it before me had been there for 35 consecutive years. That's how difficult it is to find a place to be on Monhegan. I found out about it. I contacted the owner, and the rest is history. She's in Florida. She comes for anywhere between 8 and 10 days every year. And the rest of the time I'm there. I'm about 25 steps from this view, which is at the top of the hill by the lighthouse. That is a painted photograph. That's the first one you're seeing here right now. One of mine. It's one of my painted photographs. This is iconic Monhegan. The bell used to be over on Manana, which is another little anti-island off of Monhegan, very small place. And the Coast Guard would use that bell to warn ships. Monhegan is still, the lighthouse is still part of the navigational system for ships, going out into the Atlantic Ocean, being 10 miles out. This is a Rick Dascom painting. He is the president of the Hudson Valley Artists Guild. They have a show up right now, I think in Lyme, Connecticut. They do an annual show. And this is what we call the backside of Monhegan. That's a photograph. The other one was a painting. That's also the backside of Monhegan. First land trust in the United States, started by the Edison family. Thomas Alva Edison's son, Theodore Edison, and his wife, Anne, came out to Monhegan. It was back in those days when the Rockefellers were doing their thing up in Bar Harbor, right? Acadia, that's very much the result of Rockefeller involvement. Remind me to tell you a funny story about him, David Rockefeller, afterwards. So Ted Edison saw the potential for development, and it was starting to happen. People were starting to build out on the tallest cliffs in the entire state of Maine. He said, this can't be. And so he started buying up land, and he gathered up enough land, and he went to the locals because there was a year-round community on Monhegan. Lobstering is a tradition. And he gave them money, and he deeded over all the land that he had purchased. And so because of that activity, there's very little development on Monhegan. The headlands, the tallest cliffs in the entire state of Maine, 17 miles of trails through a pristine forest. It's a wonderful place. If you're a hiker and you like that activity, this is a great place. You visit artist studios, you eat lobster on the beach, and you find yourself a cozy place to stay. Now we're coming to, some of the painters on Monhegan, and this is a Susan Gilbert painting. She lives there year round. She's a Schenectady native. She graduated from Niskuna High School and ended up going to the Boston School for Art and landed on Monhegan. And she's pretty much been there ever since college. And her husband recently passed away, Victor Lord. We were all very sad about that. He was such a great man. But she remains, and she paints. And these are images that I pulled off of the internet. She makes these magnificent gardens every year, and then she paints them. I hope you guys could see these pretty well. These are the fish houses down on Fish Beach. This is where we eat our lobster. There's some picnic tables down there, right? So you can see how much art is going on there. This also is a Susan Gilbert painting. This is another local artist, Amsterdam, New York native, Robert Furta. Wonderful painter, wonderful guy, walked on to Monhegan, found this particular painting is hanging in I have a gallery in Albany where the hearing aid business is. Feel free to contact me if you want to see the show. I'm happy to show it to you. This is 16 by 20 oil that he went down to the beach. He's an older guy, 85 years old. He's been coming out to Monhegan every couple of years. And so he put these two chairs together. They were falling apart. They're leaning up against each other. One of them is missing an arm. And this this little area right there gives it all away. You can't see it. I'll leave this out for you guys to flip through. But this, that is the dock of Monhegan. It is like no other place in the world. So he makes it happen. It's in its right place. Another Bob Furta piece. Isn't that beautiful? Love that work. So every year at the Island Inn of Monhegan, we feature an artist. This year it's Joan Bradley. Unbelievable artist. Met a guy. Just by chance, she moved out to Monhegan. She's been there ever since. She makes some of her own mediums, and she does beautiful, exquisite work. Great. She's in a class all her own, I think. I could never paint like this. I guess if I took 3 months, maybe I could. Like that. Isn't that great? Yeah, Joan, this will be a great show. This is just extraordinary, really. This is the work of Kate McLaughlin. Kate McLaughlin, Woodstock, New York painter, former president of the Woodstock School of Art. She does printmaking. She teaches printmaking. I just had a text from her yesterday. She's in Donegal, Ireland, working for, I don't know how long they're going to be. They're going to be there at least another week. She's a quick painter, Kate is. She makes it happen really quick. And she likes that. That's her energy. She really likes doing that. So when you see her works very frequently, it's minimal palette, right? Just very, very limited number of colors in this piece of work. 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe. 4. This is another Kate. Okay, so now we're going to move along to when I wanted to tell you, I brought this because it is a nice example of a sepia tone, black and white sepia tone. It's a bath. After it's developed, you put it in a sepia tone bath. This happens to be my foster family. This is my aunt Mabel. She was married to Harry Hall, who was the town supervisor for the town of Queensbury for many, many years. But I brought that mostly so that you could see a sepia toned print. So this piece, I found the frame. This is the work of stillwing and roth. Of stillwing and roth, Andrew Wyeth said he was the best artist in his day working in black and white. Lithograph produced by the Cleveland Print Club, but Stowe's connection to the Albany area is pretty big too. He was also produced by the Albany Print Club. And my understanding is that they are still in existence, primarily in storage, but a lot of the work in storage. I need to connect back in with them again. Don't go buy a pile of garbage in the state of Maine, because I found this on the side of the road. A signed lithograph. And now I stopped. This is not the frame it was in. I stopped because if it's a frame, you want the frame. I want the frame. You know, Grandma Moses. I don't know if any of you saw the show it was like 30 years ago at Proctor's in Albany. Is it Proctor's in Albany? Is that the theater? Yeah. Oh no, what's the one in Albany? Palace. The Palace in Albany. Corlis F did play about Grandma Moses, and she was asked by an Albany Times. Grandma Moses was asked by an Albany Times Union reporter, Mrs. Moses, please tell me about your process. And Anna Moses looked at this guy and said, process? I'll tell you about my process. Well, first you get the frame. And you know, there's a lot of truth to that because I look for frames all the time. I just got lucky. This was like $25 in a antique shop in Ballston Spa. You know that string of antique shops in Ballston Spa. Yeah, I thought this was just amazing with these brass cornices. Oh, come on. I thought the Wangenroth was just perfect for it. I have a book of his work over there. You can feel free to flip through it. Over 300 lithographs this guy did. Exquisite. I mean, just genius, I think, genius. And the Cape Ann Museum in Gloucester, you guys familiar with Gloucester at all? Well, the Cape Ann Museum right now, it has a show up, and that show was on Monhegan last summer. And they shipped it down to the Cape Ann Museum because it was Cape Ann and Rockport artists and Monhegan artists, people who worked in both places. And it's still up, I believe, at the Cape Ann Museum.
How do you spell it?
Gloucester,
No, Cape,
Cape A-N-N-E.
Cape Ann.
Yeah, just Cape Ann, yep. It's just a little north of the city of Boston. It's right in downtown Gloucester. It's a gorgeous little museum. When I went there about a month and a half ago, they had devoted an entire room to stillwing and roth. It's like this big, these two rooms put together. But very open space. So when you were standing in the middle of the room, you literally could do this and get a panorama of all of this guy's work. It's just pure genius. He died, I think, in 1975. But I wanted you to see this just to tell you, don't go past a pile of garbage on the side of the road. You never know, especially in the state of Maine. Yeah, you already don't go past the garbage. No, yeah. So that's the sewing one. I wanted you to see that. So I'm gonna flip back here now a little bit, back to the painted photograph, and we'll be in and out of this. And to tell you what I did with it. So after we went back, and I said, I'm going back, and I talked to Neil McGreevy in Albany for papers. I started sending him files because everything is digital. I'm shooting digital now. At this point, I'm now back shooting some film because I want to, and I'm making photographs and I'm studying it, and I'm finding that nobody's really paying attention to the painted photograph. It was just so pedestrian. It was, nobody was really paying attention. And yet I knew when I took my color theory class at the University of Albany with Dennis Bing, who was twice a Guggenheim Fellow, which is a huge award, that color theory was important. And the study of color was important. And why weren't we looking at this when in fact, we only have two mediums in the whole color spectrum that looks at color laid down upon a gray surface. A painter will take a canvas, cover it completely in gray, wait for it to dry, and then start painting. We call that grissaille, G-R-I-S-A-I-L-L-E. And the painted photograph. So I'm asking the question, well, are we serious about looking at color? And if we are serious about looking at color, we need to start looking at what happens when color is laid down upon a gray surface. So I was committed at that particular point in time. And so I started to look for a home for the painted photograph. And one of the places I found was, of course, George Eastman, who is responsible for painted photography and the whole process to literally die in a day. The day that George Eastman gave the world color photography, everybody put away their materials. Everybody stopped painting their photographs. We were done. We could get it with a click of a finger. And so I went to Eastman, and I was given an opportunity to get into their archive to look at some of their painted photographs. I'm going to give them a few of mine at some point in time. And I had the opportunity to photograph at Eastman also. Don't feel, I'm going to pass these around. Don't feel badly about, touching the mats. It's fine. They get handled frequently. The mats get changed. That's George Eastman's desk. And this is George Eastman's chemistry. This is a painted photograph. I took the photograph. It was a display that was in there. In the lobby, yeah. Have you been there? Has anybody been to the Eastman house? You've been to the Eastman house? Yeah, beautiful, right? Yeah, yeah. And so this is a display, and this, I have to tell you, it took me a little bit of time to do, only because it is so intense. I mean, and it's actually, the colors are exactly what was in the bottles on the wall. Feel free to pass that around. So while I'm looking for a home, of course, you know, I go here. But then I find at Penn State, a couple, Bridget and Heinz Hennish. He was a photography professor and she taught medieval food at Penn State. And so I called her up on the telephone. And in the summers, when neither one of them were teaching, they would travel. And they did, and rest their souls, they traveled, they put together a book. You'll find it, your interlibrary loan will find it for you. It's called The Painted Photo. And so I called Bridget Hennish on the telephone and found her telephone number, and give me an idea of time. Oh, you're good. Okay. And I told her who I was and I told her what I was doing. And we had a lovely chat. And afterwards she sent me a note, and in the note she said, if you're ever in my neighborhood, please let me know that you're coming and I'll fix us a nice light bite to eat. So sweet. She was this tall. She's 85 years old at this point. The Hennish collection still lives at Penn State. The library here in Glens Falls would be able to get you a copy of it. It's just a terrific book. They don't all, not all of the Hennish books will circulate, but I think you'll find a library that'll circulate it for you. So in my search for authentication and support and validation for the painted photograph, I met with Bridget Hennish, who encouraged me to keep going. Then I found out that, and you all know this name, Wallace Nutting, right? You all know Nutting. Nutting had 200 women working for him at the Saugus Iron Works in Massachusetts. And he rarely painted a photograph. And he rarely signed them. And he was a minister who gave up the pulpit and bought a car. And he and his wife traveled, and they went to Europe. They went to the British Isles. He's buried in Augusta, Maine, actually. She was from Maine, Mariette. And Nutting was the one who really put the painted photograph in everybody's house. Probably if you got married in 1930, the likelihood of you getting a Wallace Nutting painted photograph as a wedding present is probably pretty high, because they were everywhere. And that was the part of the problem with Nutting, is that he watered down the market to such an extent that even to this day, you can find a hand-painted Nutting for $10, right? Because there are just hundreds of them out there. Fred Thompson was another one. He was a Maine photographer. David Davidson out of Rhode Island, also painting photographs. And I kept coming across, you know, all these men, right? No one be offended, just telling the facts here. I came across all these men, but I know women are doing this because everybody wants color in their photographs. You want your daughter in her pink frilly dress, right? And there were some professional photographers who were doing it. Then I found Mary Herod Northend. Mary Herod Northend was into preserving architectural history in Salem, Massachusetts. She painted photographs, and in a box that I bought for a couple $100 at a Nutting convention were 2 Mary Herod Northend painted photographs. And I went looking for her and found out that Winter Tour in Delaware, anybody been there? You've been there? Yeah. That they had a collection of Mary Herod Northend. And so I decided I'm going to give these 2 Mary Herod Northends to Winter Tour. Now, maybe they don't want them, because Maureen will tell you that every museum's nightmare is storage. Okay. Amen. Yeah. And it's everywhere. There's no one is immune, because people want to give you stuff and it's only going to get worse as time goes on. But they were thrilled. They didn't have any Mary Herod Northend painted photographs. They were thrilled. So I got to go down a winter tour, and I had 3 full days to wander around that facility. I had a one-on-one tour guide that took me through part of it. If you've not been there, it's probably an overnight trip. You could do it in a day, but it's really pushing it. Wouldn't you agree? But there's lots of places to stay. It's the largest collection of American antiquity in the world. And while Henry Francis DuPont was filling his estate in winter tour with all of these artifacts, Electra Havemeyer Webb was doing the same thing in Vermont at Shelburne, only she was gathering the buildings. She got the carousel, she got the round barn, she got that fantastic collection of German sculpture in miniature of when the circus came to town. If you've not seen it, it's just unbelievable. And then I found out that Tom Denenberg, who is the director of the Shelburne, is also an authority on Wallace nutting. Tom did his small world. Tom did his PhD at Yale, and his thesis was Wallace nutting. Well, I had to go and see Tom, and so, I called and, we met for over an hour, and he was again encouraging me to continue. And I had an opportunity to wander the grounds, and I got a lot. Did it bring any? Yes, I did. I brought one. This is a paint, one of my painted photographs from that experience. You could pass that around. That's an amazing place. So before I go past the discussion of winter tour, see this. I'll leave this up so you can get a better look at it afterwards. So this is a niche at winter tour. And this is one of my painted photographs. I try to keep things accurate. This is a nice moment, I think, to talk about how to print. So when you're making painted photographs, of course, most everything is digital now. So we'll talk. We'll talk in the digital realm, but you can also do it in film. You take the photograph. I take it in color. I stick it on the computer. I flip it to black and white. I reduce the contrast because the paint will give you the contrast. And I increase the brightness because the paint will dampen down the brightness. And hopefully you end up with something balanced. But that's how you print. Low contrast, high brightness. And then I get that image back. And that's when I start doing the painting. The frame, again, first you get the frame. I don't remember where I got this frame, but it's classic arts and crafts. Yeah.
So when you, like, for example, when you printed the kind of black and white of that,
Yes.
do you use your imagination to design the colors, or do you have the color photo that you took
I have the color photo.
and then you try to do it exactly?
I do. There are some places where I deviate from that. But when we're talking Henry Francis DuPont, I can't improve on that. All right. And I would never do anything to detract from what they were doing there. So yeah, so that's, yeah, good question. Yes, I keep the color, unless I'm shooting in black and white, which is what I'm doing right now, and some of that. But yeah, I try. So what ends up being here for me is that I'm taking photographs of things that would have, if they didn't call it photography, right? This would have been photographed in black and white and somebody would have painted it. We know that no one did that, but that's how it would have been documented if it was going to be documented in a photograph with color. And I do love that frame so much. So yeah, so winter tour. So I'm at winter tour, and then I'm up at Shelburne, and now I'm thinking, arts and crafts. This is about the arts and crafts movement. This is the same time period. We get the first photographs in the middle 1800s. We don't get color photography until 1940. And so what's going on at that time period in the world? William Morris is doing his thing over in England. Elbert Hubbard has the Roycroft community just outside of south of Rochester and outside of Buffalo. If you've not been there, that's a highly recommended place, a wonderful restaurant there and a hotel. And it's arts and crafts, and you know it. It's oak furniture, oak dressers, that famous inn down in Asheville, the something Grove Inn. Elbert Hubbard's community made every stick of furniture that went into that hotel. Still in that area, they celebrate a lot of arts and crafts stuff. So now I'm thinking, oh, arts and crafts, arts and crafts. And so I go online and I'm looking for architectural examples of arts and crafts. And I find a house in just outside of Los Angeles. Pasadena, thank you very much. Have you been there? Yes. Yeah. So give me the name of the house again. We're having a brain dead moment.
I don't know what house.
The house that with the house, it'll come to me. So I just have to let it go for a second. So I call to find out about the possibility of coming to Pasadena and photographing this fine example of architecture. I leave a message, and the message I leave is that the Gamble House, Pasadena, California. The message that I leave is for the director. And hi, this is Corlis. I'm calling you from my home in Lake Luzerne. And I'm interested in the possibility of shooting some photographs of the Gamble House. Could you please give me a call? This man gives me a call back. Turns out he wrote the book on the Green brothers in Lake Luzerne. It's just so weird how everything kind of just sort of fell in. And so it ends up that, he would come up 3 years. He did this, and he would come up and he would work there and, keep in touch with the folks in Pasadena. But he ended up writing the book on the Gamble brothers. The Gamble brothers, they were considered to be the finest arts and crafts architects in the world. They were educated, they were from St. Louis, they were educated in the East, and they went out to Pasadena, and there's a place in Pasadena, a neighborhood called Bungalow Heaven. So now I have a body of work from that experience. And that is this work. I had 3 days in the house. My only rule was that I could not step on the carpets that were imported and huge. I mean, huge. I think I'm gonna take this down. And then this one, I left this without the mat on it so that you could actually feel the paper, right? And feel free to touch. This is a Tiffany lamp in the Gamble House in Pasadena. One of the wonderful things about what I do is that before I even get here, the work is already done for me. I mean, can I ever do any better than Louis Comfort Tiffany? I don't think so. And so when I show these works, I'm humbled, because were it not for their great ability to design and create these magnificent artifacts, doesn't make any sense. But I wanted to do this because this is what would have been done at the time that piece of furniture was installed at the Gamble House in Pasadena. And so that wasn't my last stop, but that sort of rounds out, except for the work that I've done on Monhegan, that sort of rounds out my experience with paint photograph. I teach it. I give people, tell them where to go for their materials. I taught an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old about 3 weeks ago, how to do painted photograph. So let's talk about materials. We talked about Marshall oils. We talked about peerless watercolor. I don't want to not notice and not acknowledge just simple watercolor pencils. You know, you have to be careful. You got to make sure you got good, strong point, and you have to be sure not to use a lot of water. But you can move those watercolor pencils, that paint. You can move that around a little bit. It gives you exactitude when you're using pencils like that. And I don't know. I mean, I find the palette to be different than anything I see in the art world. This color on top, this muted color on top of in this case, it was a sepia. I had this printed sepia and then colored on top of the sepia. Yeah.
So what type of paint did you use to do this particular technique?
This one I used a combination of elements. I used some pencil. And when you look at it, you can see up close where you can see some of the texture in the paint. I use some watercolor. It all kind of depends on what I'm doing. You can see a lot of, like I would apply the pencil down here. You see the edge not even here, and then move it out, thin it out a little bit with some water, but not a lot. That's the tricky part. And if you're thinking, you know, you'd like to play around with this a little bit, start small. You know, get some 5x7s made up. Don't start with human faces. That will discourage you right off the bat, right? Because it's so hard to get those skin tones, right? So you want to start with a landscape or a still life, a close-up of something, but not necessarily face. I want to just review these a minute, make sure I didn't miss anything here. This is, oh yeah, this is interesting. So this is a piece. I got a couple of things here I'll show you. This is a piece where I only painted half of it. I left some of it gray because people like to see process. You know, they like to see how that all, you know, comes together. So you see that I mostly just painted the palette. This is my little painting desk on Monhegan, and the tablecloth, which I again try to get those exact colors if I can. But that was one of those, and that happens. This one, this is an interesting one. This is a photograph of the book cradle, I guess you would call it, of my piano. And this is the wall of my house. This is an oil painting that I did, this in the background. And this is a regular photograph that I took. And I must have been organizing, and they were all laying on top of one another. And I sort of liked what happened. You know, I had the complementary colors, the blue and the orange, very important to the process. And so I photographed it. And this is the iconic, the inn Monhegan right here. But this was originally a photograph. But so this whole thing got printed. Neil printed the whole thing. And you can see a little bit, well, not really, but that's the piano right there. That's, you know, the front part of the piano. And then last but certainly not least, and then I'll go into the slides. I'll just finish. We covered everything. This is Susan Gilbert. I have two of her paintings right now at the gallery in Albany. This is the backside of Monhegan in the winter. She is there in the winter, and I'm sure she didn't stand outside for that painting. I'm sure that, oh yeah, sure. I'm sure that she took this photograph and did it from the photograph. But the two paintings that I have of hers right now in the gallery is this one and a close-up of an area called the Boar's Head on Monhegan. It's on the backside. It's in there someplace. And again, you know, painted in winter, and Niskuna High School graduate. Sweetheart, just a total sweetheart. I've been so lucky to meet so many wonderful people on Monhegan. Let me see what else I got here so I don't miss anything. No, I don't want that. Okay. Florida. Here are three more stillwing and roths. He has a niece that works in Woodstock area as an artist, both she and her father, both Wang and Ross. This is the Marshall Point Lighthouse. When we go out to Monhegan, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, you go from Port Clyde, and this is right down in that same area, but this is a lithograph by stillwing and Roth. Okay, so tomorrow morning, I will get up at 6 a.m. and hopefully be in my car no later than 7:30. And I'm heading up to up north to State University, New York at Plattsburgh. Rockwell Kent. Anybody familiar with that name? Rockwell Kent lived out on Monhegan for a period of time, an extended period of time, actually. The house that I rent on Monhegan, the woman who owned that house was a housekeeper for Kent's mother. Kent built his mother a house, and I'm going to be able to show that to you in a minute, out at Lobster Cove, in a beautiful spot. And that house now belongs to the Wyeth family. Jamie, actually, the son of Andrew, comes out to Monhegan and he paints out there. So on Sunday, my husband Bob and I went down to Cooperstown to see the Wyeth show that's currently hanging at the Fenimore Museum. And I recommend that you go now. Do not wait until July. It is so busy in Cooperstown. Now it's perfect. There's nobody there. You don't have to hassle with parking. 3 generations of Wyeth are on display. And in another room is the work of an artist, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce his last name. First name Dennis. He's you can look him up on the Fenimore website. He's a professor at RIT. He got a grant from, I believe, the National Science Foundation to go down and follow in the footsteps of Rockwell Kent. Kent went to Greenland at a time when it was difficult to take a train from Albany to New York City. I mean, he was on boats and going to Greenland. He was an interesting guy. He's not serious. I mean, we celebrate him. I celebrate him because I think he was a terrific painter. And this is actually Gull Rock on Monhegan that he did. But he was an avowed communist. And after World War II, he lost his passport because he sat before the McCarthy, however you want to describe those crazy people, and said he was a communist. And so they took his passport away from him. And so he said, okay, no problem. And he shipped off a big chunk of his work to the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, Russia. But at the State University of New York at Plattsburgh, they have a Kent exhibit that includes images of Monhegan and Greenland and Tierra del Fuego, all these places that he went and worked. So we're down in Cooperstown on Sunday, and this photographer from RIT has this magnificent show up of Greenland. 5 years he shot this, and they're big and huge exhibit, 2 big rooms. And they had a little corner space where they had planted some Rockwell Kent images, some of his lithographs, etchings. And they had a little, this kind of thing with images popping through. And in the images that are popping through are painted photographs done by Rockwell Kent. Now, I probably could have immediately picked up the phone and said to Robin Cribb, who's the director of the Kent Gallery, "You've got painted photographs of Kent? How can I see them?" Right? But I didn't. I'm going to see her tomorrow morning. We'll be in the fall, and that I'll be able to get to see those painted photographs. Very interested to see what he did with painted photography. Again, like I said, nobody's looking at Kent's painted photographs because they're looking at these huge oil paintings that he did. They're looking at the glassware that Macy's produced of his work. Serafina, one of his characters from Newfoundland, I believe, was on dishes and plates and cups and that kind of stuff. But he was on Monhegan for a long period of time. This is a place we call Gull Rock. You can walk to that. You can see the iconic cupola of the island inn. We see sunsets like this. This is a Kent painting. It's a big painting. Much of Kent's work was very big. Again, another Monhegan image. And so now I'm just gonna, I'm gonna flip through these. This is a Wallace Nutting, and you're welcome to flip through them too. Another, Nutting was very much into putting people in colonial garb and taking their photographs, staging it, and then painting them. And again, this is a David Davison. He's still collected. There's a guy in Rhode Island who has all of his equipment actually. This is another David Davidson. Again, it's kind of a hard one to see, but again, you can look through these. This is a Fred Thompson. Is that right? Hold on. No, this is another David Davidson. They were all doing about the same thing, right? These bucolic landscapes. Oh, this is a Fred Thompson. He liked to do things kind of elongated and tall. New Hampshire. Maine, Portland, Maine. Another Fred Thompson. I just put these down. This is Mary Harriet Northend's book that she did, which you could get out of a library at any particular point in time. This is the Hines and Bridget Hennish book on the painted photograph. They have images, and of course you saw this. And these images I just pulled off. These are Jamie Wyeth paintings of Monhegan. Right, there's the bell again. Everybody does the bell. Yeah.
Would you mind just starting to wrap?
Yeah, we're wrapping. Again, a Jamie Wyeth painting, Monhegan. That's the Rockwell Kent house. That's why I put this one in. This is a lithograph that I own. Jamie and Bob had a car accident together, and Jamie gave Bob a limited edition lithograph signed by both Jamie and his wife Phyllis, who's no longer with us. And this is the first painted photograph. This is the second example of the first painted photograph that I ever did. That's right. That's right out of school. Yeah.
Other than the historical, you're collecting on the artists that did it, and you're teaching it, so people are still doing it as a pastime, and you're using it. I gather to work on being a colorist. Is there a big following for new artists to do painted photographs that are selling?
Only if they were, no.
Or just, so it's
Nobody's looking at it in terms of the palette. They're just looking at it in terms of, oh, well, the image is already on the page. Okay, you can just color right over that, right?
Well, so I'm saying, I think you're viewing it somewhat as an art form, but is anyone currently viewing it as an art form and doing it as putting it in galleries and selling? Or is it more people are interested in the historical?
When I'm in my studio on Monhegan, and I probably see 2,000 people in a season, maybe more. No one has ever said to me, oh, I do the painted photograph. Okay. No gallery has ever said to me, oh, we'd like to represent you. Right. No one's ever done that because there's nobody out there like me promoting it, but there are other people who are doing it. And I'm sure, to answer your question, that it's in somebody's gallery someplace. Somebody's picking it up someplace, depending on what the content of the imagery is. My approach was to just go into antiquity, which is sort of where I felt it belonged. Oh, this is another one of mine. This is one of the fish houses on Monhegan. And another one.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Alrighty, now, we're all familiar with the tinted, I'm asking the difference. Photographs of like people, like me, when I was a little girl, we have one, I've got the teddy bear, and it's obviously not a black and white photo, a color photograph. So is that also considered that?
Yeah.
Because it's much less, it's more translucent, it's not as
Love to see it.
dark and stark like the one behind you, for example, is very rich and
Yeah,
dark.
no.
It's not as light colored.
This is unique in the field. This is, Maureen and I talked about this when I first got here. This is kind of unique that you ever see anything overpainted as heavily as this one is. That's layer upon layer upon layer. And seeing the back of this will be of value to me to figure out what it's actually done on. But they listed it, it was given as an oil painting over a photograph. Beautifully, absolutely beautifully done.
We picked
And-
it up for the frame.
I'm sorry? Yeah, right? Oh, yeah, first you get the frame,
Yeah,
right?
first
Yeah.
we got the frame.
Yeah, exactly. These are the paints that I was talking about, the peerless watercolor paints. I wanted you to see those. Just Google peerless watercolor, it'll come up. You dip a brush in water and then you go into the paint, you pull the paint off. You can put them on a palette, you can mix them up. And I think that's it. And of course, there's the Marshall watercolors. And to end this conversation, yes.
You mentioned early on museums being reluctant to display watercolor
Yes,
photographs.
anything.
If you own one, is there something you should be doing?
Yes.
To preserve it? or
Yes, yes, you should never put it in, you should always make sure that it's not ever going to see any bright light. The only light that can ever hit it is coming from a north window, and then it should be very minimal. Because they fade, they just don't last that long. Do you have a watercolor that's pretty precious that you'd like to protect?
Yeah, it's in a frame behind glass.
Yeah.
been hanging on the wall for 40 years.
Yeah, how's it doing?
That's fine as far as I can tell.
As long as it doesn't have
I
direct
never-
sunlight on it, it'll probably be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it ever has been. So.
We have special glass.
There are some special
Oh.
glasses you can put on. I'm not crazy about them because I think they detract from the image, but it is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to end with this because this is completely off topic, but really valid in terms of, well, let me say this. It's never too old to start. I was 44 when I graduated from the State University of New York at Albany, and I've been nothing but art since then. So if you haven't found it yet, I encourage you to look for it, whatever it is, whether it's a small sketch, it doesn't matter. I mean, just find it because it brings great peace. Start small. Don't try to, make a massive painting the first time you sit down. Sketch a lot, but do something artistically. Find that. Well, maybe it's woodworking. My friend Michaela is a weaver. She does weaving. But I want to end with this because this is the work of a Monhegan artist that very few people looked at. She lived on Monhegan. A collector from New York City bought her a house on Monhegan. She lived there for 25 years. She died there. Her husband was there. He couldn't take it. He left. Lynn Drexler continued to work on Monhegan. She couldn't give these paintings away. She would tell people who would come to her studio, go look, go see if there's something there you like. Lynn died the year I first lived on Monhegan. And shortly thereafter, they put her paintings out on the lawn, and the Farnsworth Museum in Rockland, Maine, which has a lot of Wyeth work, were given first refusal for 6 paintings. This was one of the paintings that the Farnsworth took 20 years ago. This painting sold at Sotheby's a month ago for $1.2 million.
What is it?
Lynn was all about just getting the color right, getting the color balance right, and the mark. When you look at her paintings, you can see mark repetitions all the way through it. But mostly her paintings are color studies, and she takes abstract expressionism and puts it in the same category as European and American Impressionism, and comes up with this and a number of other things that look like this. She did a lot of representational work also, but I thought you should see what a newly discovered artist who's been dead for 20 years. God bless her. She was wonderful. She loved opera and Jack Daniels. True story. And I met her and I had a couple of times with her. She was a very interesting woman. And she just spent her entire life doing this every single day. So there are a lot of Lynn Drexlers out there. and you'll hear more about her. But feel free to take one of those cards, and you have any questions, there's some books up here if you want to take a look at them. I brought them. Have a little Rockwell Kent book there that he did when he took his son to Alaska. That's on the table. You can see that. And I really appreciate you guys coming out. Happy to answer any questions.
No, one quick comment. You are amazing.
What?
And thank you for sharing. I'm sort of in awe at all of your connections and your ability to remember virtually 99.9% of what you told us.
I almost fell down on the Gamble House, though. That one almost did me in. But you repeat it enough times, and I live it, right? So,
We have a passion.
and I definitely have a passion for it. And telling people something that I appreciate so that they might gain greater appreciation of it. It's all good, but I promise you're not going to see a lot of painted photographs on museum walls.
Except
Maybe
for the
occasionally.
Chapman.
Yeah.
Except for the Chapman, That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I ordered up an 8x10 of the phonograph, and it's coming in on Monday. So
Great.
you'll get it in the mail.
Great.
I'll
Well,
send
thank
it.
you
I'll
very
send it
much.
to you guys. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Corlis, I want to give you a round of applause at the very beginning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And look.